welcome to this very special Glasgow 850 podcast special. Today, we're talking about the rise and the recognition of women's football in Glasgow and in Scotland. And we have three amazing guests. First up, the co-founder and CEO of Glasgow City, our most successful club, arguably the most successful in women's football worldwide, Laura Montgomery. Laura, welcome.
Hi, delighted to be here.
Great to see you. In the colours as well, wearing the Glasgow City strip. And she's fresh from another win yesterday as we record this. Also, we're delighted to welcome Fiona McIntyre, who's the MD of the Scottish Women's Premier League. Fiona, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And with us, someone that you will all recognise. She's been a trailblazer for women's football in Scotland. It's Maureen McGonigle. Maureen, great to see you.
And you, Paul.
Now with Scottish Women in Sport. So in the next 50 minutes, an hour or so, we want to find out what's happened in the past with women's football and also where it's going. And Laura, from your point of view, Glasgow's most successful women's club, Scotland's, and arguably in the world. How have you managed to do it?
Goodness knows. No, I think just having a very clear plan, I think, we've been around for 27 years now. So back when we started, the world of women's football in Scotland was very different from how it was now. One of the reasons we started the club is because things were so bad, to be honest. I grew up at a time where there was no opportunities for me to play football, wasn't allowed to play in school. So it wasn't really until I went to university I could play organised football. And then the opportunity to then play at senior level, you realise that really as women we had the worst of the worst. So that's the reason we started Glasgow City, to try and help drive that change.
We need to come back to that because you just said you weren't allowed to play football. Most people, young people, won't realise this was the case. And we'll come back on that. Women weren't allowed to play football in Scotland. It was banned, actually, by the authorities until, I think, 1974, Maureen. I mean, it was even before our time, but not that long ago.
I think the ban was basically the SFA said to the parks, don't let them play, said to the referees, don't let them play. So women could still play, but in an unstructured way.
Why?
I think it's like everything at that point. Men felt that they had the right to decide what women do. Sometimes that perhaps still exists, Paul. But I think we then have some really smart women that decided it wasn't for them, and trailblazers like Laura made the difference and fought to get the women the same equality as men. And to be fair, you're still fighting, Laura. Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in the coming moments because we want to be positive as well, but there's a reality. And when I did some research, which, yes, I did some research, hard to believe, but I had forgotten it was actually banned. You weren't allowed to you didn't get caps, for example, for Scotland until after 1995, but we'll come back to that. And Fiona, you're at the sharp end, running the professional game at the top level, and it has moved on. How far has it gone in recent years?
Yeah, I think that's one of the more positive things we can speak about today, is that there's been a lot of progress. Laura's story is very similar to mine. When I grew up, there's limited opportunities for girls to play football. Now there's not only more local opportunities for girls to play, there's actually the chance of having a career. We've got more professional players than ever playing across the Premier League. We've now got broadcast contracts that mean more people than ever are seeing the Women's Premier League and the very best players in the country. So those things are all really important if we're going to progress and really make women's football the best it can be in Scotland.
How did you start out then? I know you were in Ayrshire.
Yes, in my back garden, probably like most kids in Ardrossan, in the back garden with my brother kicking a ball about. We built a set of goals, much to my mum's annoyance, in the back garden, kicked the ball around. My local team, despite being in Ardrossan, was down in Largs. I was fortunate my parents actually encouraged me to play, but we trained once a week on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. No structured competition. Once every year we had a tournament that we would turn up to and would play. That was my experience growing up until I was about 13, 14, and more organised competition came in thanks to the work that Maureen did.
And did you feel that people just didn't take it seriously? Because you didn't have enough games, did you? There weren't enough organised teams.
It definitely wasn't taken seriously, but also I think my identity was the girl that played football because it was so obscure. Now I'd like to think that girls that are playing football, it's relatively normal. There'll be more than one of them in their class or in their school that play football, but it became something that was almost my identity growing up because it was so few of us that actually played football at that time.
Maureen, you must be proud of what you did to get women's football recognised against a backdrop of such resistance for so long. We were the only country in Europe and UEFA who banned women's football. Others wanted it to be recognised and encouraged And up until 1974, we were saying no.
I remember when I first came in, one of the first things I was charged to do was to approach the SFA for support to put the women's national team into European Championship, which I did. We put together a proposal and they gave us £12,000. And I met with one of the employees at that point. He said, "You'll be fine as long as you don't get the Faroe Islands." And I thought, well, what's the chance? There's so many countries. And we did get the Faroe Islands. And at that point, you could only fly via Copenhagen. It was about £600 per person. And I thought, there goes the whole money. And I've got I think we had England and we had another country to do. And I went to bed having sleepless nights, put my head on the pillow and I thought, I'm going to hire a small plane. And I did. And we flew from Aberdeen to Wick. We refueled. We flew into the Faroes. We stayed one night, played the game. They kept the airport open for us. And we flew back the next night. And we didn't manage in £12,000. I had to go back again, cap in hand. But,
What year was that?
That would have been when I just started. It would be, I started in 93, so it'd be early 90s. And if you felt as if they didn't want you to succeed, that they were putting the blockers in your way at that point. Things have changed, I have to say. But it was interesting, Paul.
Laura, you've got a lot of football in Europe, such success there. What's that landscape like financially then when you're in?
I'd say it's better now, but it's interesting to listen to Maureen's story because I think, we've been, 17 years in Europe. So women's European competition only, it's not been around for as long as our club. So I think probably mid-2000s is when it started. But I mean, we were travelling on our credit cards, Cass and I, our co-founder, because that's the only way we could fund the team to go and play in Europe.
So
and then
Colonel and Stuart were using your credit cards?
we'd put it all on our credit cards and then we'd try and fundraise it back thereafter. So things are different now and there is finances, but I would say it's not... for example, we're in the brand new Europa Women's Cup, which is fantastic. I think having a second competition for women is outstanding, and it'll lead to much more competition, more teams in Europe longer, more visibility for women playing. But I mean, financially, there's no rewards there. Probably, at best, we'll break even. So we're not quite the level the men have got in terms of it being really, really lucrative. But it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Have we made major jumps? I'm thinking of Glasgow City. I mean, we'll come to the fact that Celtic, Rangers, I know they've been professional women's teams for a long time, but what about Glasgow City itself? How do you manage to survive up against these big clubs, the giants?
I'd say we're the big club. Their men's clubs are big clubs. Yeah. Listen, I just think we've very much got a values-based business. We've been very clear. I think we're probably the only really true, authentic club in terms of what we've been saying and doing for 27 years hasn't really changed, no matter what the landscape of the game's been like. So we're just true to who we are, and thankfully there's people out there that believe in what we do to be the right way to do things and invest in us to do so. So yeah, our club's completely professional. First team level, we've got a massive academy of nearly 200 girls. So yeah, we're a pretty big football club these days.
And you don't have your own stadium though, like the Rangers or Celtic or whatever, but Petershill Park's been a good home for you.
Yeah, we've played in a few different places over the years, but yeah, Petershill Park's been where we have been most, and I think probably where we'll be for the considerable future. So yeah, in terms of for us, there's very few Glasgow based. I mean, we're actually ourselves in Partick Thistle women also play at Petershill. We're actually the only Glasgow club that play in Glasgow. Everyone else has to play outside. Outside the city mainly. So yeah, Petershill's a good base for us at the moment, and we've had some amazing experiences there, particularly in Europe.
And how do young girls coming through just now in 2025 aspire to? How did they actually manage to get into the Glasgow City squad? What's the jump?
Well, I think it's like anything. I think now it's very different, as Fiona was describing when we were kids. I think if you want to play the game, you generally will know there's football, there's structured organisations, which Maureen helped to start all those years ago. So there's lots of teams to get involved with. Obviously, to get into maybe some of the more elite teams that maybe we are, then yeah, we have kind of a free entry pathway into our youngest age groups, and of age 6, 7, 8, and then thereafter it becomes more selective as they get to kind of under 13 into that kind of next gen elite professional girls academy program.
What was your favourite time when you were playing football? Because everyone who goes into management or administration says there's nothing like actually playing.
Yeah, probably my best experience have been when I wasn't playing. I think because when I played, I still ran the club and I had all the stress of, I never forget this time we were going out and playing this European game and I'm captaining the team and I'm walking out and I'm shouting for someone to correct a sponsor's banner because I know the sponsor's attending, and my head coach is going, Laura, get in the game. So largely I probably didn't enjoy it the way I maybe could have because I was focusing on so many different things. So I think when I stopped playing, I probably got to enjoy it more. I'd say so. Yeah, we've had some, I think for us reaching the Champions League quarterfinals twice, I think, was probably our highlights. And we had a big title win at Ibrox a few years ago in the 92, 92nd minute. That was a big moment.
I can just imagine that, Fiona. You're trying to concentrate in the game. You see the sponsors missing. I can identify with that. Can you?
Absolutely. Every time I go to a game, I see it very differently. I'm thinking about what our sponsors are saying. I'm hoping that all the medical provisions correctly in place. You've seen the sponsors' banners on the side of the pitch, and we're thinking about the broadcast and how that's all going. So you definitely watch football very differently when you're working in it, and depending on what your responsibilities are, it certainly sometimes can take away from enjoying the football. Sometimes I actually enjoy going to a men's game because I've got no responsibility there, so I can just watch the game. But when I'm sitting at particularly an SWPL game or one of our cup finals, your mind certainly is on many other things until the game's over, and hopefully it goes without incident.
I see you did well at a Reebok tournament, and Andy Cole, obviously a wonderful striker for Newcastle men's and Man United. You met him. It made me think of kind of role models you would have, because there's not as many women in the game in those days, but who was there to inspire you coming through?
I think when I was growing up, I've always been really honest, my role models were male football players because that's who I saw on television, that's who I looked up to. That tournament you referred to was one of the annual tournaments that we went to that was sponsored by Reebok, and all of their sponsored athletes would come to us at national finals down in Bolton, it was at the time. And that's things that I remember. That I think I was 12 years old, and I remember that so vividly because it was on Sky Sports, and you're meeting these players that are full-time real superstars. So that's the kind of memories that we want to create for young girls growing up. But hopefully it's players at Glasgow City that they're looking up to and they're really excited to see. And that's one of the things I've seen really change across the last few years, is young girls are really now beginning to get the female players' names on the back of their shirts. They're waiting around for autographs. These are the genuine role models for the next generation, and just like I say, very different from what I grew up with.
Maureen, for you, who did you look to in football to be inspired?
Well, I was never, by the age I was, or when I was young, many years ago, there wasn't really opportunities to play in sport. I think, when you were at school, all the teachers who took sport were only interested in those that were really good. They didn't have this kind of sports for everyone ethos. But football was in our family. We were very keen football supporters. My uncle,
your uncle?
Yeah, he was the first substitute.
Was he? First.
Leslie Johnson is his name. He played for a lot of clubs. He got transferred. He was the highest transferred player of his time back in the late 40s.
Yeah.
He went down to Stoke City from Celtic, and he was the first sub because they'd allowed subs because it was during, I think, or during it after the war. It was ridiculous. I should read all the stuff that's with him. Didn't really know that till after he died, and the funeral, they put the caps and everything that he had.
Know this? No.
I knew he was a football player, but I didn't know what his actual success was.
That generation didn't boast, nowadays. And his successes were all on Insta or whatever, or TikTok. But then they were very modest.
Yeah, he had 8,000. I think it was £8,000 was his transfer fee, and my Aunt Babs didn't want to go because they were second in the housing list to get out the prefabs. And when they went down there, whoever the manager was put them in this fabulous house, and he had a great career down there. But he played for Scotland, and he played in Switzerland and scored. And I think the next time that Scotland scored in Switzerland, it was Ali McCoist's goal. And they mentioned Uncle Liz in the radio, so that was really nice.
That was in the 96, wasn't it?
Probably
the Euros, when he scored against Switzerland. Yeah. I remember it. I remember being at the match. I love going to see my granddaughter Maria plays on a Sunday morning, and I can see more and more young women, young girls. She's 10, and the parents are getting more and more involved. Laura, do you see a change that it's, you say, well, what's on this weekend? And it's not just the boys' games; it's the girls' games. There are almost as many
Yeah, but I think that just shows the general kind of change of attitudes and equality and everything. You know, I think going back to, you know, as Maureen described, when things changed, it was almost like that. That was through kind of the women's drive for equality in general across the world, which is how the ban on women's football kind of got turned. And I think now, as, you know, parents the age they are, have grown up at a time where, you know, they're probably mum and dad have both worked, you know, so they've expected equality in the household, and now they have children, they expect full equality for their children. So I think no matter what their kids want to do sports-wise, they get the opportunity. So now girls have the opportunity to play football. We realise it's the best sport ever, and there's a huge amount of girls wanting to play it as well as a huge amount of boys. So yeah, you know, the numbers are vast. You know, as I say, our academy, you know, has been bursting at the seam for years. There's lots of young girls playing, and you know, I think, as you're quite rightfully saying, there's so many girls now, you know, wearing football tops. Like when Fiona and I were young, if you were wearing it, I always remember breaking my arm in PE in primary, and I was wearing the Scotland strip, you know, the one with the hoop shorts.
Oh yeah.
And I remember sitting in the Victoria Infirmary, and everyone stared at me because I was a little girl with this football strip on, waiting my turn to go in, because you just never saw girls. But even now, not just a girls playing football, it's perfectly normal to see girls wearing football strips, and with women's
great to see women's bands in the back, the Leanne Rosses and Joe Loves. Who were your heroes, or who did you look to in football?
Again, like Fiona, there was I wasn't aware of any women, you know, even back when I was young, even women visibility in sport was really limited. I'd probably say it was only the Olympics. I would actually see women on the TV or in the papers as actual sporting athletes. So it's probably like Tessa Sanderson and Fatima Whitbread, you know, women that had a chance of winning things for GB that I would see. So yeah, there was certainly no female footballers or local Scottish athletes that I ever had visibility of. Now, as I say, that's changed. You know, you go along to any of our games, there's a queue of kids, boys and girls, you know, waiting for the autographs of the players as they come off.
That must be lovely. It's brilliant to see. It's not just about the men's heroes in it. Television, you mentioned, Fiona, and there's a deal with Sky for the women's game. How much of a game changer is that for you?
It's huge. I think even a few years ago, if somebody had said the SWPL would be on Sky, a lot of people would have thought that was pretty unlikely. So we're lucky we've got a really good balance with our broadcast partnerships. We've got Sky, who cover 5 games per season, including the cup final. So with that comes, obviously everything that comes with Sky is these sort of fantastic cameras and production. All week they'll promote those games on Sky Sports News, and through that connection with Sky, it means that the SWPL is an ever-present on Sky Sports News. So just that visibility in the background is also really important, because it means that even if you're not someone who's proactively looking for the SWPL, you see it. If you're watching Sky Sports News, the scores come up, the league table comes up, and it's treated just the same as any other. But we've also got really good partnerships with BBC Alba and BBC Scotland, and that's who actually carry the huge volume of games, and they've been, particularly Alba, have been long-term supporters of women's football in Scotland. So we think we've got a good balance where we've got a really large number of games on a terrestrial, highly accessible channel, but we've also got those flagship games on Sky Sports, which takes us to a different audience that maybe the SWPL hasn't been present for before.
And I remember this year in 2025, and this is a Glasgow GA50 special podcast, we're looking at the history of football in this city, and it was a Glasgow team right until the last day of the season. Of course, it was Hibs that won, so Edinburgh won on that occasion, but for the television audience, it was a cliffhanger.
We've had 3 cliffhangers. Laura will remember one of them very well, when Glasgow City won at Ibrox, and that's been the beauty of the SWPL the last 3 years. It's been so competitive that right up until the final day of the season, we've not known who's going to win. And for us, that's a massive selling point, because towards the end of the season in May, a lot of other titles in Scotland are maybe determined already. So the media does turn their attention to the SWPL, and timing was everything last year. We happened to have Rangers versus Hibs, the 2 teams that could win the title, playing each other at Ibrox in front of the Sky cameras. So you can't ask for more than that in terms of trying to really show the very best of what the SWPL is all about. Was
that a fix, getting those 2 right to the end? I know it was.
Definitely not.
Yeah. And Laura, what about that game that went to the last day of the season? Was that the year before? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think fantastic. I think because of that, it's the age-old thing when you talk about, you know, as a sports person, you know, I look back to when I played, you know, you can win cup finals, you can win things, but see if you win it in the last minute of the match, or you overturn from being behind, and, you know, that kind of exhilaration you feel is, I think second to none. that's the beauty of sport. So yeah, that was fantastic for us. And as Fiona said, I think it's actually the last 4 years, because I think when we won it the year before, it was also the last game. So, us as a league, we've got the most competitive, league there is across Europe in terms of, the kind of top 6 teams that we have. They play in the SWPL. So from an audience point of view, it's a cliffhanger every single season. And, I think, every single year, I think the whole country's divided as to who can win, and probably every year nobody gets it quite right either.
What's the positive thing then? And I get it. The men at that time, I guess they were a product of what they were conditioned to. It was after the war. It was a very old-fashioned, very staid way of living it. Some people would say it's still prevalent in Scotland that we need to be trailblazers. What did you do among the blazers to try and change things?
Well, although the ban was lifted, I didn't come into post until 1993. And at that point, I was advised there was only 3 letters within the SFA, anything to do with women's football. And I think they'd had an incident prior to that when a team put themselves together as Scotland's team. They went out to Holland. They had a leg break, I think it was. They weren't insured. They went back to the SFA to get some help. And of course, that actually made the gulf even bigger. So we had to start. We weren't an affiliated association, so we had to start. And I remember we had an office in the Kelvin Hall, and I remember bringing Jack McGinn, John Macbeth, and the hierarchy of Scottish FA at that time.
And Vice President, probably.
Together with some of the people from Sport Scotland and one of my colleagues at that point, Sheila Begbie. And we had a meeting, put them forward as we wanted to be affiliated. We'd spoken with Sport Scotland, they would fund a position. As long as the SFA housed us. So we took that out and we took it back to them. And then we became an affiliate association. I remember going again to the chambers within Park Gardens. Mm-hmm. Quite an imposing place, dark furniture. It was like going into court. I felt as if I was in front of the judge and the jury.
He did that on purpose. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the only women there in a sea of men, all in suits, all just looking grey, to actually be accepted as an affiliate association. So it was incremental steps, and it was about at that point. And this sounds dreadful because I've got these 2 fantastic women here, but not rocking the boat too much. You had to take it slowly to get accepted. I never had sexism within the rest of the council members, but I felt more as getting a little pat in the back or a pat in the head. She's only there. Women's football will keep them happy. But we built it up slowly. And having great women that come in to help fight the cause was just amazing because it helped what I was doing as well. But it was interesting times, Paul.
Do you find, I know one of the things that you are so passionate about is equality. Do you find misogyny there in the game?
Yeah, I think we would be advanced further if there hasn't been misogyny, over the years. And I think there's been, I think it's well documented. There's a lot of, as Maureen's described, pat on the back. Yeah, you sit there and be nice, but probably behind your back, they're like, oh, well, just give her 2 minutes of her time and she'll shut up and she'll go away, and let's hopefully she doesn't come back and ask for the same thing next week. So,
and did you?
Yeah, of course. That's how we have progressed. But it has been I'm probably less. I'm probably a bit more of the louder shouter to make things happen. I think these 2 have been a bit probably more pragmatic, and you need people to work with you as well. So yeah, I just have a much kind of lesser tolerance for, we need kind of equality and equality now. So yeah, things have progressed a lot. We're in a much better position, but there's still many things that do need to change. But we have come a long way.
Fiona, you must deal with it as well. Is it improving?
Yeah, my experience has been really quite positive within sort of the central bodies of Scottish football. So I've been at the Scottish FA, been with Scottish Women's Football, and I'm now with the Scottish Women's Premier League. And I think what I've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is a far greater respect and understanding that women's football is elite now. I think for the longest time, women's football was sort of housed as this non-professional, recreational activity that was okay for us to play. In the last few years in particular, I see a big shift towards a real understanding that, no, this is elite level football and it should be treated as such. And there's been simple steps like the SWPL now is represented in the Scottish FA's professional game board. That's the first time in the history since that board was set up that women's football has been represented on it, because up until then it was just represented in the non-professional side. So there's been a lot of steps along the way, and I think, to Maureen's point, a bit like yourself, sometimes it's incremental and I feel now for the first time in the longest time we're really pushing at an open door. There's a far greater respect and understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and there's a more united approach to that.
And where does Glasgow sit in all of this? I mean, we know in the men's game it's been the football capital of Scotland, I think we'd all agree. And the women's game, the job that you do and have been doing at Glasgow City and the clubs, where do you think Glasgow sits?
Glasgow for me always has a unique part in football because it's just a city that football means so much to on the men's side, and now even more so on the women's side. I think Glasgow City are the substantive club in Glasgow because they've been around for so long. They're the most successful women's club in Scotland, so I think that's what's really unique about women's football. Excuse me, is we have this club that sits outside the men's traditional clubs and they've got their own values. So Glasgow City are really central to everything that's good and great about women's football in Glasgow. However, historically, we've also had really successful teams in Edinburgh. I think that's something that I'm really pleased about in my role at the SWPL, is that success has been spread across the country. We're seeing progress being made with clubs like Aberdeen in the north as well. And for me, a successful Women's Premier League is seeing clubs from across the country doing really well. But as someone based in Glasgow and seeing the history, certainly Glasgow City and the clubs in Glasgow have got a huge role to play.
And looking at the clubs around Glasgow, there's no shortage of them. So there's a real competitive edge to it all. And the pride of coming out number one in Scotland, but also in Glasgow.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, we're really proud to be from Glasgow. We have it in our name. We have the whole city in our name. So, yeah, as Fiona said, we've got a great history of football in our city. And I think, anyone that comes to visit, well, for example, our last home game, we had a whole bunch of Bayern Munich fans at our game. Yeah. So they'd come to Glasgow for the weekend and they'd chosen our game to come to. So, I think that's our city is synonymous with football. So you get that quite a lot. You'll get football fans will come and they're like, okay, what games are on? Who will we go and see? And it's, it's great for us if, they choose to come and see our match. But I think again shows the changing of attitudes towards the sport that, these fans were male, they supported the men's Bayern Munich team, so then we're the kind of game of choice for the weekend when they're here. So
the beer sales, did they go up then with the...
We don't sell alcohol at our game.
Oh, you don't? Excellent. Yeah. Because too often that can be the default position. But Maureen, when you see Hampden then for the national team playing there, that was a step forward as well, wasn't it? Big time. How proud do you feel when you see Scotland women's playing there?
I think I'm always proud to see Scotland women's playing because, back at the very start, it was really, really difficult in what we had to do. I can give you quite a few instances. We get invited to go to play in Brazil. And I had said to them, I can't come out, I can't afford to. We had no money. And they said, we'll cover the cost. I said, no, I can't even afford the visas. We'll cover that. So we had great opportunities. And so
is this the Brazilian FA or?
It was the Brilliant Women's FA, but they were supported. So we went out there for 3 games and played out there. And so you got to know all the youngers. Julie Fleeting was just turning 18 at the time, and all the youngers. And then I was fortunate enough to travel with them for many years because, again, the only women on the SFA Council when they needed a head of delegation. I got the shout, which was great. So you got to know them. And if you knew them from the very start, when they, as Laura had said, had to actually fund themselves to go and represent their country. And then even when we did get with the SFA, what did we get? We got the men's cast-offs to wear. I came home feeling 2 stone lighter. By the time you'd finished walking about in a tracksuit that was made for a man.
Are you serious?
Oh, for many, many years. We were only seeing the past, maybe 10 years, you've seen a women's kit come in and a women's fit come in.
And even the players getting to take them home. They used to have to, when I never represented a national team, but when I was playing, so the players used to, they would get the men's kits to wear, as Maureen said, even they had a delegation, she'd be wearing an extra large men's, but they had to get changed at the airport and hand the kit back. Mm-hmm. So they would get into Glasgow and they'd all go into the toilets, take off their Scotland gear and hand it back. So we've somewhat advanced since there.
We had to travel at the most obscure times. We went to play in Ukraine and we had to get 3 planes there. But we would be the ones that would be leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning because it was the cheapest flight to go on. So there's been great improvements. But I think what actually makes me happy is we know there's more improvements, but we know we've got an army of people pushing for those improvements. I could never have predicted where we would be now, I have to say. I never thought women would get paid to play football.
Did you
know? No. So I've been proven wrong, which is great. And so can prove me wrong for the next few years and make even more strides. I think it'll be fabulous.
Wow. How were the Brazilians? Was it like the men's game, the special talents?
Well, actually, it was a wee bit scary because, I had to sit in the dugout because of the fans. The Brazilian fans were a bit wild.
Yeah.
And also we had policemen with guns at either side. So you really didn't watch. You're too busy watching everything else and thinking, am I going to be fit? And the weather was horrendous. Too hot, and then it was flooding, but it was a great experience, and we had a lot of good players. And at that point also I appointed national coaches, so we had Miller Hay. I don't know if you remember Miller Hay.
Yeah.
What a lovely man from Glasgow again.
Or Miller Hay,
And so it was nice then. I'm not saying it's not nice now, and I think it's professional now, and it takes a different edge, but it was lovely being involved at that point.
Pioneering days. We mentioned Julie Fleeting. Fiona, was she one of yours as an Ayrshire woman, young woman coming through? Tell us about Julie.
Well, everyone knew Julie just because she was a special talent, and for me, still one of the best players Scotland has ever produced. I played for Kilmarnock at the time, and she was at Ayr United, so there's a rivalry. But she was sort of, I was just coming through at that time, and she was at our peak. But I think even now we still speak about Julie as probably the best striker we've ever produced, and rightly so, because she's also the first player I really remember leaving Scotland and becoming professional. So I'm, as a young player, pretty recreational, playing at a good level, but at that point I had no idea it could be a career. And then I remember Julie going to Arsenal and then actually going over to the States as well, and thinking, well, that's the first time I thought this is possible. Maybe women can be professional footballers and it can be a career, and Julie was certainly a pioneer on that, and simply because she was so exceptional and absolutely incredible player.
And she's gone on to a great career as well, not least in coaching, but also in broadcasting.
And she's someone else that had to juggle a job. She's playing at the highest level, but she's flying back up to do teaching. So she's playing down at Arsenal and then going back up and having to do her day job. And I think now, one of the things I find rewarding, a bit like what you mentioned about seeing more and more women pushing and being involved, it's great now seeing women that are former players that maybe didn't get the reward financially or professionally that they could have because of the level they were playing at the time. Now, post-football career, they're actually doing more things in the media, and I think that's really important for the visibility and to really recognise those women that were pioneers before, as you mentioned earlier, the days of Instagram, great coverage on television, and it becoming more professional and popular.
The players, they are on a lot. I know they are, aren't they? They are great ambassadors for the game, not just the way they play, but by promoting it now on social media.
And that's what we need. And I think women's football is slightly different as well. A lot of fans follow players. So particularly with the Lionesses down south, you'll find a lot of the young girls that follow the Lionesses, they'll pick Leah Williamson or a player of their choice, and they'll follow that player no matter which club she's at. So the affinity isn't always to the club. Sometimes it's to the player, and you see that even up here now beginning to happen where young fans just really relate to that player, and that's in part due to the fact what they're doing on social media. They're really showing who they are as people beyond what they do on the football pitch, and I think that's something that young girls in particular really connect with.
Or if you ran Scottish women's football, and in fact no more than that, the whole game in Scotland and the country, so if you had the government money, which is the people's money, what would you do? Because I can tell you trained as a lawyer, you were a lawyer, you worked in the commercial side at Hibs, you played, you have run Glasgow City. What's the path that you would go down to try and level up, get more money in the game, and get people to really love women's football, which I know they do more and more, but sometimes it's lip service?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of things. I think a big thing is probably facilities. So we have a dearth of facilities. Like there's no women's club that really has their own ground. So obviously Celtic women, Hearts women, they can play at Tynecastle, Parkhead, so they can utilise, their main stadium. Is it probably fit for purpose what they need now? Do they need a 50,000 seater stadium now? No. So I think we don't have facilities for us to play in, and every facility we do play in has been built for men to play football. And the women's audience is very different. It's a much more environmentally aware audience. It's a much younger audience. There's a lot more families, so that creates the whole seating bowl has to be completely different. So, for example, when I was talking about us playing at Petershill, one of the best things we have at Petershill is we have this gap between the seats and the pitch, and kids run about up and down there, and then you can face paint there and you can do posters there. If you go into traditional, stadium, there's no room for that. You've virtually got this amount of space to squeeze past someone. There's no room to get a pram or a buggy through the turnstile, so all of these things that need to exist for our game, I think, to thrive, and for our kind of community that comes to watch us enjoy it. I think also kind of investment in the structures for our younger players. I think as clubs we're all trying heavily to invest in that, but when we're talking earlier about the advancement of the game, that's to do with the players we are seeing now playing in the Euro finals are they've got strength and conditioning, they've got nutrition, they've got highly qualified UEFA badge coaches. We need to get that infrastructure down to the girls game, which exists in the men's game, and it's partly funded by the SFA through that. We don't have the same funds coming into the women's side, which I think would help grow the national team players for the future. And then I think as well, I think we've all got a responsibility to have just generally more visibility. So, we go back to, because we were stopped playing for so long, it's like a small start-up business. And, if you compare to men's football has that audience already, because with all our parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, uncles of years ago played the sport. Everyone knows where those teams play. The media's been following it for so long. It just exists. We can need a push up because we don't have that background that exists in people's knowledge. So people don't automatically know that Glasgow City play at Petershill Park, but everyone will know Partick Thistle play at Firhill, for example. So I think just all of those things combined.
Maureen, what would you say then to Laura and to Fiona and people coming into the game and people at the game just now at the sharp end? What kind of advice could you give to try and get them further down that pathway?
Well, first of all, I think they're doing really, really well. I'm not really one for giving out advice because I don't think that I'm always right. So I can't give people advice if I don't believe sometimes. But I think keep on doing what you're doing. I don't be complacent. Laura, I think, we were speaking earlier about how perhaps Fiona and I are different from what Laura does, but I think that gives you the balance. And if Laura's happy to sort of keep on biting and Fiona can be at the background supporting and moving quietly, I think getting the balance of characters is fine. But I don't think we've got the same battles as we had years ago. We've got different battles and it takes different skills. And I think the sort of young women that we've got in these positions have those skills. So I think the future looks really rosy. It's not going to go back, Paul. It's going to go forward. And the numbers of young women and young girls that are playing football is going to continue to grow. And it's huge at the moment. So that there's a great future. And Glasgow as a city has embraced that. And there's more and more young girls from Glasgow playing football now. So, if we come back in another 850 years, we might have a different story.
And I think as well, I would just add to that, I think as well, for those of us that run clubs, which are really businesses, the responsibility is on us. We have got this, we're in this position now, which many of us thought we wouldn't be in. So it's, I look upon myself as it's my responsibility to navigate my club in the level we are, to keep us growing, to keep bringing more incomes to grow our audience. So it's not all, it's not all on, somebody needs to give us more. We have a responsibility to grow our own audiences and, create our own income, which I think we're all moving in the right direction for as well.
Fiona, I'm going to throw this to everybody. So the Lionesses and their success, is that a strength or a weakness in our game? Are people saying, why have we not got the success of England? We know we did well in 2017 in the Euros, 2019 getting into the World Cup, but not, on the national scene, we haven't had success since then.
I think the Lionesses' success is good for everyone in women's football, because I think what it does is illustrate what can be achieved when you have a plan and you invest in that plan and you bring all the stakeholders together to deliver. Because the FA, maybe 10 years ago, put a lot of money into women's football and have done over the last 10 years. They built their domestic league. They invested in youth development, to Laura's point. They invested in the next generation of young players, and they have then seen that come to fruition at two major tournaments now. So I think for us, what that shows is what can be achieved when you have a plan and you invest. And to Laura's point, there's some key areas that we really need investment in. But for me, it's about building a self-sustaining women's football model for the future. At the moment, we're very reliant on commercial revenues and broadcast revenues. What we're beginning to see is a transfer market evolving. It's slow, but you're beginning to see more players moving for money. We need to make sure that our game is equipped to capitalise on that. We will see a compensation scheme come in from FIFA, which will incentivise clubs financially more in terms of developing young players. And again, to Laura's point, we need to grow the fan base so that another revenue stream for our clubs is people coming through the gate and paying for tickets. But we are a start-up, so I think what we need at this point in time is more investment to get us to that point where all of those strands can be realised. But at this point in time, we need better facilities and more investment in youth development.
Again, help or hindrance, transfer fees. I know there are £1 million transfer fees now in the women's game, but in the men's game, so much of the money goes to the players. And we want players to do well, of course we do, because all the authority, all the power was with football clubs for years, but now it's players and agents and all the rest. And I guess maybe you've got a chance to make sure that the money is wisely spent in that ecosystem rather than going straight to players or agents who nobody seems to be too much in favour of.
Yeah, I would say that's an interesting point, and I think it's probably a crux where the women's game is just now, particularly in some leagues. So we'll talk about the WSL in England, which is probably proven to be one of the most successful. Like their salaries are getting quite scary. You look at, there's other big clubs like Barcelona and Lyon paying big salaries, but as a whole league, they're a bit of an anomaly, where in England, the women's game's a bit like the men's game now. That's where all the wealth is. So I know from speaking to a number of clubs down there, they probably quite like a salary cap, but then the league's not going to want that because their players then going to go and play in other leagues where they can earn more money. So I do think we do have a point where I think we need to be careful of the growth, and I think I never want us to get to a point where it's kind of boom or bust. I think we have to grow, as Fiona says, on that sustainable level, and that's just also on, to be honest, the amount of time the players are asked to play. I think at the moment our top players are playing a lot of games. They're actually playing too many games.
How many roughly?
Well, they'll be playing about 70 odd games a year, the top players. So, but that's because I think there's so much commercial revenues coming in where, the top female players, so your Leah Williamsons, they're winning the Champions League, they're competing for the league, they're playing in Euro finals. But every single summer there's a major competition, and we haven't yet got, for example, in the women's, the Olympics probably needs to change like the men's game has, where it maybe becomes more an under 21. So because there's been so much interest and the audiences are vast and sponsorships now becoming significant for tournaments, we've got a Women's Club World Cup now, there's just more and more being added, but we're putting that burden on a small group of elite players to kind of advance the game for us commercially. And I probably have a little bit of a fear, for them, for their longevity in their careers, that we're making them play too many games.
Laura, what's your football ambition then for Glasgow City? Because we think it's absolutely brilliant that we've got, Celtic Rangers have brought so much to football, no question, and the history of it. And I know there's the other side of things, the bigotry that we wish wasn't there, but the clubs themselves do a lot. For Glasgow City, what's your ambition?
I think our ambitions have never really changed. I think it's to have a football club that helps deliver positive change for society, and that accounts in different ways. So obviously, if we're successful on the pitch, that helps elevate that significantly. So, we want to win on the pitch. Listen, I'd love to, we're in the Europa Cup on Wednesday night. I'd love to say one day we'll go on to win it. I think
Do you think you will?
I don't think it's without the realms of opportunity for a Scottish women's team to win the Women's Europa Cup. And again, it's fantastic. It's the old-fashioned home and away. It's none of this fancy league situation. It's just old-fashioned European football. Our ambitions are to do that. Our ambitions, I think, is to grow the game in Scotland for everyone. To make sure it remains the number one sport. For girls to play, actively grow audiences. I think. It's not changed for us. It's to grow the game for the good of everyone, and if we can be successful within that, then that's an extra bonus.
And you still enjoy it.
Oh well,
you can see that. We can hear it. Yeah. No, Maureen, what you did is huge, and you still do it. You've got women in sport, and I think some things are going to happen even more after this. But that's not to take away from what has been happening. Look at the strides you've made with the Women's Premier League. What's your ambition? What do you think in the next 5 years?
What I'd love to see for the Women's Premier League, and I don't have a timeline on this, is a fully professional Women's Premier League that's self-sustaining. I can bring its own revenues and generate its own revenues to make it so it's professional. I'd love to see a successful national team that's regularly back at major competitions, because we know the impact that has on young girls playing football. I'd love to see a thriving just domestic recreational girls programme where more and more girls in Scotland are playing football.
Fiona, Maureen, Laura, thanks so much for joining us for this Glasgow 850 special. And I think everyone's enthused and looking forward to the future. And we thank you for everything that you've done and do for women's football. Thanks very much.
Thank you.